Imagine you are building a new house. You lay the foundation, you put up the walls, you finish the roof, and you're finally ready to move in.
Sounds like a dream, honestly.
Right. But now imagine that if you forget to build a little railing around the edge of that roof, you are suddenly considered, well, in the eyes of the law, to be the moral equivalent of a murderer.
Which just sounds completely insane to a modern ear.
It really does. But today we're diving into an ancient text where that is exactly the case. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. Our mission today is to explore a really thought-provoking Bible study teaching titled Jesus and the Law.
Yeah, this was given by a speaker named Nick on June 25th, 2026.
Exactly. And we're going to unpack a fascinating new lens for viewing these ancient rules, the supposed contradiction between the Old and New Testaments, and the psychology of how we judge ourselves versus others.
It's a fantastic teaching because it takes concepts that people usually find incredibly dry or intimidating and makes them intensely personal.
It really does. And the source material actually kicks off with 3 ancient rules that create this massive, glaring tension. So I want to present you, the listener, with those exact 3 rules right now.
Lay them on us.
Okay. The first one is from the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 13. It simply says, "You shall not murder."
Right. Universal moral law. Any functioning society agrees with that one.
We totally get it.
Yeah.
The second one is from Deuteronomy 15, which basically says, don't be tight-fisted, lend freely to the poor.
Again, makes perfect sense. Basic human compassion.
Yeah, community responsibility.
Yeah.
But then we hit the curveball, Deuteronomy 22, verse 8.
Here we go.
Right. The text mandates that when you build a new house, you must build a parapet, basically a railing around your roof.
Okay.
And if you don't, and someone falls off, you bring blood guilt on your house.
It's just such a specific, weird pivot.
Okay, let's unpack this. What on earth does a highly specific, totally random building code about a roof railing have to do with foundational moral laws about murder or charity?
Well, what's fascinating here is how Nick uses this exact tension to totally reframe how we view these ancient texts. Because a modern reader usually approaches the Old Testament as this fragmented list of, disconnected chores.
Yeah, or like obsolete civic codes that mean nothing to us today.
Exactly. But the source argues that the 613 laws in the Hebrew Bible are actually meant to be understood as one continuous, unified thought.
Right.
And to understand the roof railing, you really have to understand the architecture of the ancient Near East.
Because they obviously weren't building, modern suburban homes with steeply pitched shingle roofs.
Far from it. In that culture, flat roofs were functional living spaces. Like, they were patios. People slept up there in the summer heat. They entertained guests. They dried flax.
There's a whole gathering place.
Yeah, exactly. So if we look at how Jesus later summarized all 613 of those laws, which he boiled down to just loving God and loving your neighbor suddenly, the parapet makes total sense.
Wait, I have to stop you there. A roof railing is a reflection of loving your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that feels like a massive reach. It's just ancient OSHA.
Ancient OSHA.
Like it's a safety violation, not some profound theological statement.
Yeah, it sounds like a stretch until you really look at the mechanics of what the law is doing. The text specifically mentions blood guilt.
Right, which sounds pretty severe.
It was. In that society, if someone died on your property due to your negligence, you were held morally and legally liable for their blood. So the law is saying that if you don't build a railing, you are demonstrating a reckless disregard for the physical safety of your neighbor.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, taking personal preventative responsibility for the well-being of your neighbor is, according to this framework, just as much a part of loving them as giving them a loan or, not stabbing them in an alley.
That actually shifts the paradigm quite a bit. It takes this tedious list of checkboxes and turns it into what Nick calls a character profile.
And that is really the core thesis of this whole teaching. Nick introduces this concept that the law is essentially God's portfolio.
The portfolio of God. I love that phrasing.
Right. It's like the divine handing humanity a resume and saying, this is who I am. This is what I value. Every single aspect of the law is designed to reflect a specific character trait.
And he extends this idea to the narrative books of the Old Testament too, doesn't he?
He does, yeah.
Because normally when people read these ancient texts, they just ask, okay, what's the historical lesson here? But the source insists that reading it like a history textbook kind of misses the forest for the trees.
Because the primary purpose, according to Nick's framework, is revelation, not just history. He breaks down several books to show how this portfolio works in action.
Give me an example.
Take the book of Exodus.
Wow.
If you read it merely as a travelogue of Israelites wandering around a desert for 40 years, it's pretty frustrating. But Nick argues it's a systematic revelation of divine character.
Right, like the burning bush that isn't consumed.
Exactly, which demonstrates supernatural power over the physical elements. And then you have the 10 plagues.
And it's crucial to understand why those plagues happened the way they did, right? Because they weren't just random natural disasters.
Not at all. Historically and theologically, each plague was a direct attack on a specific Egyptian deity.
It's like the plague of darkness.
Right, which targeted Ra, the sun god,
No.
and the plague on the Nile targeted Hapi, the god of the river. The text is establishing unmatched dominance over earthly empires.
And then you have the manna falling from the sky, which from a character perspective shows that this deity isn't just some distant warlord flexing his power.
Yeah, he's intimately invested in their daily survival.
Right, he's literally providing their breakfast. And then, of course, the terrifying lightning and fire on Mount Sinai, which establishes pure, unapproachable holiness.
It's all a giant neon sign saying, "Get to know me." And Nick applies this lens across the board. Like, Daniel isn't just a survival guide for Babylonian captivity.
It's a revelation of divine protection and a foreshadowing of the Christ to come.
Yes. And Jonah isn't just a bizarre tale of a guy swallowed by a fish. It reveals this profound mechanism of divine mercy, showing God using the most unwilling, prejudiced person to save an enemy city.
But this brings up a major roadblock for a lot of people, and I really want to push back on this on behalf of the listener.
Go for it.
If the law and the narratives are God's perfect portfolio, right, revealing a perfectly consistent character, why do so many people casually divide the Bible into two completely different gods?
The two gods fallacy.
Yeah, you know the trope. You've got the Old Testament God who is furious, throwing lightning bolts, demanding bizarre blood sacrifices, just wiping out rival nations.
Very wrathful.
Exactly. And then you flip to the New Testament and you have Jesus, meek, mild, teaching peace, love, and forgiveness. To a modern reader, it feels like a massive corporate rebrand.
It really does, and it is arguably the most common critique of the biblical text. But Nick tackles this fallacy head-on. His counterargument relies on a theological absolute presented within the text itself, that God does not change. He points to the verse stating that the divine is the same yesterday, today, and forever.
So the division is actually a modern misreading.
Completely. It ignores the vast overlap in both testaments, because the source points out that the Old Testament is actually overflowing with mercy if you just know where to look.
Oh, like right at the beginning. After Adam and Eve rebel in Genesis, the text says God personally clothes them.
Yes, and you see the divine repeatedly sparing a deeply stubborn Israelite nation. You see intense provisions built into the civic laws for the poor, the widow, the immigrant.
So the mercy didn't just suddenly materialize when Jesus showed up.
The source argues it was always the baseline.
But what about the blood sacrifices? We have to understand the mechanics of those, right? Because to us, sacrificing an animal just seems barbaric.
To a modern mind, absolutely. But in the ancient Near East, blood literally represented life. The theological argument here is that a holy God cannot simply ignore a violation of the moral order.
Justice demands a penalty.
Exactly. The sacrificial system wasn't about an angry deity demanding violence. It was a mechanism of substitution. An innocent life was offered to atone for the guilty, allowing a holy God to dwell among an imperfect people.
And on the flip side of this two gods fallacy, the New Testament isn't just sunshine and rainbows either.
Not at all. Nick explicitly mentions the Book of Revelation, which is packed with divine wrath, ultimate judgment, and severe finality.
Which brings Nick to his conclusion on this point. You cannot separate the testaments as though they represent different versions of the divine.
Right. According to this teaching, the God who spoke through terrifying fire on Mount Sinai is the exact same God who walked the shores of Galilee.
The God who established the sacrificial system to atone for sin is the same God who became the living sacrifice.
Beautifully put.
Okay, so if God's character never changed, and the law is still a perfect reflection of that character, then Jesus didn't arrive on the scene to just cancel the old rules.
No, he didn't.
And this leads to a really shocking moment in the source material regarding the Sermon on the Mount. Because Jesus doesn't lower the bar to make things easier for everyone, he actually makes the law infinitely harder.
He elevates it to a degree that would have induced absolute panic in his original audience.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Nick highlights Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 5. Jesus literally tells the crowd, "I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill them."
Right.
And then he drops this absolute bombshell. He says that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven.
Which is a terrifying statement for them.
Well, for you and me listening today, we hear the word Pharisee and we immediately picture cartoonish movie villains.
Like religious con artists who are just there to act as a foil for Jesus.
Exactly. But we suffer from the benefit of hindsight.
We know how the story ends, so we flatten the Pharisees into one-dimensional antagonists. But we really have to look at the historical mechanics of how they lived.
Because they weren't just guys in fancy robes. They were the ultimate standard of rule following. To the people sitting on that hillside, the Pharisees were the most dedicated, spiritually elite people on earth.
They were. They took the 613 laws and built fences around them. Like, if the law said, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, the Pharisees mapped out exactly how many literal footsteps you were legally allowed to take on a Saturday.
Wait, really? Just footsteps?
Oh, yeah. They debated whether you could eat an egg laid by a chicken on the Sabbath because the chicken technically worked to lay it.
That is wild.
Their entire existence was meticulously designed to avoid breaking even the smallest rule.
Oh, I get it. So for a modern listener, Nick uses this great analogy. He says, imagine walking into a Catholic mass and saying, you need to be holier than the Pope to get into heaven.
Which is just, wow.
Or he makes a joke about his own church. He says, imagine walking in and being told you must outrighteous Pastor Rick, Pastor Jared, and Bishop Harper combined.
Which just highlights how absurd the standard is. It's not just a high bar, it's a demoralizing, mathematically impossible standard.
The audience on that hillside would have been stunned into absolute silence.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of what Jesus is doing in the Sermon on the Mount, we see how he achieves this impossible standard.
Right. He begins a series of statements saying, you have heard it said, but I say to you.
According to the source, he isn't abolishing the law. He is reinterpreting it to its deepest, most foundational intent.
He bypasses the external actions and goes straight for the internal life.
Precisely. You have heard, do not murder, which is an external action. But Jesus says if you even hold hate in your heart toward your brother, you are subject to the same judgment as a murderer.
Wow. And then you have heard, do not commit adultery. But Jesus says if you even look at someone with lust, you've already committed adultery in the internal reality of your heart.
And Nick has that funny little quip there where he's just...
Oh, yeah, don't do that. Never in a million years. Love you.
Yeah, it's a funny moment, but it emphasizes that Jesus is deliberately creating an unachievable standard. He shifts the standard from just manage your behavior to don't even allow the thought to briefly take root in your mind.
And Nick brings in James 2, verse 10, to explain the mechanics of this, right?
Yes. James 2:10 states that whoever keeps the whole law but fails in just one point is guilty of breaking all of it.
I always struggled to understand how that makes sense. But Nick uses this analogy. If you think about the law not as a checklist, but as a giant pane of glass.
Oh, the window analogy, yes.
Right. It doesn't matter if you hit the glass dead in the center with a sledgehammer, or if you just tap the bottom left corner with a pebble. The whole window shatters. The integrity of the glass is gone.
That is the exact mechanism James is describing, which brings us right back to the roof parapet from the beginning.
Oh, I see where this is going.
You might go your entire life without murdering anyone. You might give half your salary to the poor, but did you forget to build that railing on your roof? Yes. Well, the glass is shattered. You are a transgressor of the entire law.
But if failing one obscure building code makes you just as guilty as a murderer, that creates a horrifying math problem for the listener.
It really does.
Like, how could anyone possibly balance that scale? Why would a divine being give a set of rules that he knows absolutely nobody can follow?
Nick's answer to this is profound, and it shifts the entire theological framework. He explains that the problem has never been the law itself.
The law remains a perfect reflection of God's character.
Exactly. The problem is the deeply flawed humans tasked with upholding it. He points to Romans 3:23, which states that all have sinned and fallen short.
So the intention behind the law was never for it to be a ladder.
No, humans were never meant to climb it, rung by righteous rung, up to heaven.
It wasn't a ladder. It was meant to be a mirror.
A mirror. And this is where the psychology of the source material gets incredibly sharp.
Yes, and this ties into an idea Nick brings up that I think is the most relatable, piercing part of this whole deep dive. He calls it the obvious sin, idolatry.
It's such a brilliant term.
It really is. It is this universal human tendency to look at the people around us and zero in on their highly visible, undeniable failures.
Like in a modern workplace.
Exactly. You might see a coworker get fired because they had a massive public blow-up in a meeting. That's an obvious sin.
And we look at them and we use their visible failure to construct a pedestal for ourselves.
We feel vastly superior because our sins, our quiet manipulation, our habit of stealing credit, our deep-seated greed, are invisible.
It operates as a psychological defense mechanism. We categorize sinners to insulate ourselves from our own internal guilt.
We say, well, I might gossip, but at least I didn't embezzle money.
But Nick argues that the mirror of the law completely obliterates this idolatry. The law doesn't exist to help us rank ourselves against our neighbors.
When you look into the mirror of a perfect moral standard, you aren't supposed to see your neighbor's failure standing behind you.
No. You are supposed to see the exact, unfiltered, broken condition of your own art.
It's meant to show you that, apart from divine intervention, human beings are completely bankrupt.
Which brings up a massive question.
Right. If works fail, if trying really, really hard to be a good person like the Pharisees fails, what is the solution?
Nick points to the story of the rich young ruler in Matthew chapter 19 to illustrate this. And we have to look at the mechanics of why this specific young man fails.
He approaches Jesus and essentially says, I've used the law as a ladder. I have perfectly upheld all the commandments since I was a kid. I did the work. What else do I lack?
And Jesus, knowing the man's internal reality, tells him to sell all his vast possessions, give the money to the poor, and follow him.
And the man can't do it. He walks away sorrowful.
Because his wealth was his true idol. He thought his glass pane was intact because he was perfect on the outside, but the mirror of the law revealed his internal, invisible greed.
He broke the very first commandment, having no other gods before the divine.
Exactly. So if even this guy, who dedicated his entire existence to following the rules, walks away a total failure, how is anyone saved?
That's the million-dollar question.
Nick introduces a phenomenal phrase here to answer that, borrowing a theological concept from Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1.
Which says that humans were dead in our trespasses and sins.
Right. And the phrase Nick uses is, dead men don't grab.
Wow. That is a haunting image.
Isn't it? Because a drowning man will thrash and grab at a life preserver. He will use whatever strength he has left to save himself.
But Nick is saying the law shows us we aren't drowning at the surface. We are already dead at the bottom of the ocean.
It shifts the entire paradigm of what religious works actually are. You cannot do the work of saving yourself if you have no life in you to begin with.
A dead man cannot pull himself up by the bootstraps of his own moral achievements.
Nick's ultimate synthesis is that the overarching purpose of the Old Testament law, from the Ten Commandments down to the roof parapet, is designed to systematically crush human pride.
It exhausts our self-reliance.
It is supposed to bring us to the end of ourselves and reveal an absolutely desperate need for a savior.
Because we are utterly incapable of balancing the math problem ourselves.
And this is where the source concludes its thesis. In this theological framework, Jesus is presented as the only solution to this impossible predicament.
Nick argues that Jesus is the only human in history who looked into the mirror of the law and perfectly reflected the character of God back.
He is presented as the one who perfectly upheld the 613 laws, lived the flawless internal and external life that humanity couldn't live, and then bore the ultimate judgment of the law.
Which, in the context of what we discussed earlier about blood guilt, means he took the accumulated legal and moral liability of humanity upon himself on the cross.
That is the theological mechanism the source is conveying, yes. He fulfilled the impossible standard of the law and paid the blood guilt so that humanity wouldn't have to be crushed by it.
Okay, so what does this all mean? Let's take a breath and just look at the journey we just went on.
It's been quite a ride.
Seriously. We started with what looked like an obscure, irrelevant building code about a roof railing.
And we unpacked how that actually reflects a divine character that deeply values human life.
Right. We used that continuous character profile to debunk the myth of the two gods, realizing the Old and New Testaments operate with the exact same mechanics of justice and mercy.
We explored how the Pharisees used the law as a ladder, only for Jesus to reveal that the law is actually a mirror.
A mirror designed to shatter our pride, highlight our invisible flaws, and point us directly toward grace rather than self-righteous superiority.
It is a profound progression of thought that Nick lays out here. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of your daily life, it raises a very provocative question.
Oh, I'd love to hear this.
Think about the non-religious laws or standards that govern our modern society today. We have the strict laws of cancel culture, the relentless demands of social media perfection, the exhausting standards of professional hustle culture.
Oh, absolutely. The pressure is everywhere.
Right. And how often do we use those modern mirrors not to reflect on our own deep flaws, our own exhaustion, or our own toxic traits, but instead as weapons?
We use them to categorize ourselves as better than someone else whose failures just happen to be more public or visible than ours.
Exactly. What would happen in our homes, our workplaces, and our society if we stopped relying on the idolatry of the obvious sin, and instead applied the profound grace discussed today to the people we see failing on our feeds?
Man, that is a question that will definitely stick with you long after this audio stops playing. Because if the ancient text argues that the God of the universe cares enough about human life to demand a literal railing on a roof to keep people safe, well, maybe we should spend a little more time building railings of grace for the people around us instead of constantly trying to push them over the edge. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Keep exploring, keep questioning your own mirrors, and we will see you next time.